Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that's less about sword fights and more about what happens when you marry into honour, tradition, and a terrifying lack of personal space. You've heard of samurai warriors, noble, disciplined, deadly. But have you ever wondered what it was like to be married to one? Spoiler, not as romantic as the anime makes it look. Being a samurai's wife wasn't about love letters and moonlit strolls. It was about arranged alliances, emotional restraint, and folding your feelings with the same precision as a silk kimono. So dim the lantern, slide the door shut, and settle in as we travel back to a time of solemn rituals, unspoken expectations, and very sharp consequences for mispronouncing someone's title. Tonight, you're not the warrior. You're the one waiting at home, quiet, composed, and absolutely not allowed to yawn in front of the elders. Let's begin. You're a samurai's wife, or more accurately, you're the daughter of a mid-ranking noble who just traded you off like a prize scroll to secure an alliance with a powerful clan. You're barely 16, you've never spoken to your husband without bowing, and tonight is your wedding night. The air in your new home smells like cedar, incense, and silent expectations. The wooden floors are polished so smoothly they squeak. You step through the threshold of your new quarters, careful not to let your kimono drag. Your heart's pounding, your stomach's in knots, and your hands are tucked neatly into your sleeves because that's what you've been taught. Never let your nerves show. A good samurai wife is composed, graceful, invisible until needed. The household is quiet, too quiet. The only sound is the occasional clack of wooden sandals in the distance and the rustle of sliding paper doors. Even your new maids won't look you in the eye. They bow low, say nothing, and vanish like ghosts. When your husband finally enters, he doesn't smile. He doesn't bow. He just stands there, sword at his hip, his face carved from stone. You wonder if this is what it's like to marry a storm cloud. He says a single word, sit. So you do. Being married to a samurai is like being married to a volcano, calm on the outside, boiling just beneath the surface. Every move you make is bound by ritual. You rise with the sun to prepare his robes. You bow when he enters a room. You serve tea without spilling a single drop or making eye contact for too long. If he leaves for war, you write prayers. If he returns, you pretend you weren't terrified the entire time. You're expected to be loyal, silent, and endlessly patient. You learn to sleep light because the clang of distant swords might mean rebellion, or it might mean your husband is training. Again, even at midnight, you never ask which. Your mother warned you this life would be hard, but she left out the part where your every breath could be measured against the honour of your husband's name. There are rules for how you walk, how you kneel, how you fold your bedding, and gods help you if you step over a man's sword without asking. The servants gossip behind thin paper walls. You hear snatches, another wife punished for speaking out of turn, a cousin who was sent away in disgrace. You say nothing. You smile softly. You survive by vanishing in plain sight. And yet, you are not weak. You learn to hold your tears like a blade behind your teeth. You memorize poetry, not for beauty, but because it's the only place you're allowed to speak freely. You learn how to read the subtle shifts in your husband's voice, the tension in his shoulders, the moments when it's safe to ask a question, and when it isn't. You begin to understand that power comes in whispers, not roars. Your influence lies in the way you arrange a household, the alliances you strengthen through polite conversation, the way you console a war-weary man without making him feel small. This is not submission, it's strategy. But still, you are tired. Not from labour, but from the constant act of existing within lines drawn by others. You begin to envy the sparrows that flit past your window, chirping their nonsense with no fear of dishonour. One evening your husband returns home early. He sits in silence. You pour his tea without spilling, of course. He watches you. Then, unexpectedly, he speaks. "I killed a man today." You freeze. He doesn't say it like a confession. It's a statement, like saying it rained, or the rice harvest was poor. You nod, and in that moment, something changes. You realise he is just as trapped as you are, by his code, his duty, the weight of 1,000 ancestors watching from lacquered scrolls on the wall. You don't say anything, you just pour another cup. And for the first time, he takes it from your hand gently. At night, you lie in bed beside a man who rarely speaks, rarely touches, but never flinches in battle. You wonder if he dreams, if he hears the screams of the battlefield, or if silence has become his armour. You turn to face the wall, breathing in the scent of cedar and old paper. Somewhere outside, the night wind stirs the bamboo. Tomorrow you will wake early. Tomorrow you will bow. Tomorrow you will survive, because you are a samurai's wife. And survival in this world is an art of its own. There's a very specific feeling that comes from waking up in a room you technically own, but no longer recognise, somewhere between dread and indigestion. Welcome to your first morning as a samurai's wife. And no, you're not dreaming. That strange wooden scent? Real. That faint incense cloud that makes your nose itch, but you're not allowed to sneeze because it's impolite to expel wind before breakfast. Also real. And that quiet tapping outside your sliding door. Well, that's your maid. She's waiting. Because you're already late. The first lesson of samurai wifehood. You're always late. Even when you're early. You spring up like someone lit a fire under your futon and start dressing with hands that clearly didn't train at a noble finishing school. Your kimono layers aren't draping properly. The inner robe is misaligned and you definitely just tied the wrong knot. But it's too late to fix it now. You slide open the paper door, trying to look graceful instead of confused. The maid bows, too deeply. Bad sign. She leads you to the bathhouse where you're instructed to begin your morning purification. Not in the relaxing hot spring sense. This is ritual bathing, which basically means freezing water, no privacy, and a strong chance of being judged for how you scrub your elbows. You step into the cedar tub and your soul momentarily leaves your body. After bathing, you're dried, redressed, and gently reminded, without words of course, that you're to report to your new mother-in-law. Yes, the real power in the house. You walk through the corridor with the elegance of a cat in socks, bow to every lantern, servant, scroll, and possible ancestral ghost you pass. When you arrive at the sitting room, she's already waiting. She doesn't speak right away. She sips tea, and then she looks at you. Not with hostility. Worse, with evaluation. Like a merchant inspecting a slightly damaged vase. "You will begin with tea service," she says. Your first real assignment. Time to shine. You pour the tea as steadily as possible, which is difficult because your hands are shaking like a bamboo branch in a typhoon. You manage not to spill. You bow. You wait. She takes a sip. Silence. Then, acceptable. You exhale. Big mistake. Don't breathe over the tea, she adds. Noted. Your next task is household observation, which sounds productive but actually means floating silently behind older women while they do all the real work and wait to see if you mess up. You help supervise the folding of ceremonial kimono, which for the record is not like folding modern laundry. Every crease matters, every pattern has a season. If you fold a plum blossom design during winter, you've basically invited famine. You learn this the hard way. You fold a robe the wrong way, and suddenly you're getting a lecture on symbolic symmetry that makes less sense than a Zen koan. Then comes the midday meal. You're not allowed to eat until your husband arrives, which means you kneel and wait and wait some more. At one point your stomach growls so loudly a servant glances sideways. You bow to your own abdomen out of reflex. Finally your husband arrives. He sits. You bow. He doesn't look at you. You pour his tea, making sure not to breathe on it. He eats in silence. You match his rhythm chopstick for chopstick. You're told later that you ate slightly faster than he did. Another mark against you. After lunch, you're permitted a brief walk in the inner garden. Not for pleasure, of course. For composure. Everything in samurai culture is about composure. You walk slowly, hands tucked in your sleeves, no humming, no skipping, no touching flowers unless you're composing a seasonal poem in your head, which you're not allowed to share unless someone asks, which they won't. You do see a koi fish that looks like it hates you though. Typical. You return to your quarters at dusk to change into formal robes for evening observance. You sit through a ceremonial incense offering so long your foot falls asleep. You nearly yelp when you try to stand, but you don't, because you've learned your second most important lesson. Never yelp in front of nobility. That night you undress in silence. You fold your robes properly this time. You climb under the covers of your thin futon and stare at the ceiling. No one asked how you were today. No one thanked you. No one spoke more than 5 words to you. And somehow, you're not even surprised. Because now you know, this isn't the hard day. This is the easy one. The one where you are new, forgivable, a novelty. Tomorrow they'll expect you to know everything. And they'll tell you nothing. Because you are a samurai's wife. And survival here isn't about being good. It's about being better at being invisible. It's your first official full day as a samurai's wife. And spoiler alert, you're already doing it wrong. Why? Because you woke up before sunrise, but not before the servant girl tasked with waking you, which means she stood politely at your door for 7 minutes, pretending not to judge you. Also, your hair is slightly off-center. Your inner kimono is a shade too bright, and when you bowed to your mother-in-law at breakfast, your angle was just a hair too deep, an obvious sign of either inexperience or grovelling, possibly both. You're learning, painfully fast, that being a samurai's wife isn't a job, it's a performance, and the audience is always watching. The morning begins with ritual bathing. Not the luxurious steam-filled spa fantasy you were hoping for, but a quick, freezing purification rinse that leaves you spiritually cleansed and physically numb. You dry yourself with linen towels so stiff they feel like you're exfoliating with calligraphy paper. Then you're dressed, pinned, layered, and cinched until you can't breathe, move, or imagine smiling without breaking something. Next comes breakfast, which sounds simple until you remember you're not just eating food, you're performing discipline. You kneel, you keep your back straight, you pick up your chopsticks only after your husband has, you don't slurp, you don't speak, you don't even glance sideways without consequence. And whatever you do not cough, not during rice service, not during miso, not ever. A misplaced cough could signal weakness, impropriety, or, worst of all, emotion. Your husband eats silently. You eat silently. Your mother-in-law stares silently. Congratulations, you're officially part of the team. Once breakfast is over, you're not given a to-do list. That would be too easy. Instead, you're simply observed. You're expected to intuit what needs doing, to move like a whisper through the halls, to exist like incense, present, pleasant, and gone the moment you're not needed. You assist with folding ceremonial garments. You serve tea to the senior wives without being asked. You adjust a flower arrangement and immediately get corrected. Chrysanthemums in summer? A scandal. A travesty. A floral faux pas so severe it could set back diplomatic relations with the neighbours. You bow, you apologise, you go back to existing quietly. By midday your knees hurt, your stomach is still half empty, because you weren't offered seconds and you can't ask, and you're beginning to realise that the most important skill in this house is pretending to be okay when you're very much not. Still, you press on. Because it's not just about you, it's about the family name, the clan, the legacy. You're not a person in this role, you're a representative artifact, like a particularly graceful bonsai, pretty, patient, and carefully pruned. In the afternoon, your duties shift again. You're brought into the women's quarters, where the wives and daughters of the household gather for embroidery, gossip, and very subtle warfare. Here everything is polite and terrifying. A compliment might be sincere, Or it might be a veiled insult wrapped in poetry and delivered with a smile. "Oh, your sleeves are so modest. It's refreshing to see a new bride embrace humility." Translation: your kimono is outdated and probably inherited from someone who lost status in a fire. You respond with a quiet laugh and a compliment of your own about someone's tastefully simple hairpin. Translation: you look like you dressed in the dark. This is not a conversation, it's combat, with fans instead of fists. And you are woefully unarmed. Around this time, you begin to realise just how hierarchical female life in a samurai household really is. Men fight with swords, women fight with seating arrangements. You are assigned the second pillow from the end during the calligraphy session, a clear signal of your low status. One day you might earn the third from the middle, which means pleasant but not politically useful. If you ever reach the first position near the incense table, you've basically become the Beyoncé of your clan. Just before sunset, you're summoned to light the courtyard lanterns. It's considered a soft feminine task, symbolic even, a way of guiding the house into twilight. In reality, it's a test. Your flame must be even, the placement symmetrical, the matches lit without hesitation. Your hand can't tremble, your breath can't show, and of course, no smoke. Too much smoke and someone will say you're disturbing the spirits. Or worse, unsteady in your mind. You light every lantern perfectly, but no one says anything. That's how you know you did well. After dinner you return to your quarters. You undress slowly, one layer at a time. You fold each piece of your clothing with care. Not because anyone will see it, but because someone might. In this house, your actions are never just your own. Everything is a message. Everything is remembered. You lie down on your futon and stare at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house settling, the wind against the shutters, the distant rhythmic practice of someone swinging a sword in the training yard even now. You wonder if it's your husband. You wonder what he thinks about when he swings that blade, if he thinks about anything at all. You wonder if he thinks about you? Probably not. Here's a fact you weren't told as a little girl. Samurai wives were expected to be guardians of the home, yes, but also emotional vaults, cultural diplomats, child bearers, reputation managers, and sometimes, on very bad days, hostages. You were not supposed to feel lonely, but you do. You were not supposed to feel forgotten, but you do. And you were definitely not supposed to cry on your second night, but you do. Quietly, into your sleeve. Because that's what sleeves are for. Still, you survived your first full day. You didn't offend anyone. You didn't trip. You didn't break protocol. You only folded one kimono incorrectly, and you only made one joke about Carp looking judgmental, which no one acknowledged but someone definitely heard. You are a samurai's wife. You have miles to go, but you're still here. And that for now is enough. Let's be honest. You thought the hardest part of being a samurai's wife would be the silence, or the constant kneeling, or maybe the looming threat of ceremonial suicide if you accidentally dishonoured the family name. But no. The hardest part? Feelings. Not having them, mind you. You've got those in bulk. But showing them? A glance held too long, a smile that rises too high, a voice that softens without permission. That's the real danger. Because in the world of samurai aristocracy, women were expected to master an ancient sacred art, emotional origami. Fold every feeling into something smaller, sharper, easier to store behind your teeth. This morning the household is stiff with routine. You rise before the sun because nothing says high-status femininity like voluntarily freezing your kneecaps off during pre-dawn hair braiding. You bathe in water that feels 1 degree warmer than death. Then you're laced into 3 layers of fabric engineered to restrict movement, airflow and joy. It's just another normal day of pretending to be a floating lantern of obedience. Your duties are simple today. Review fabric inventories, oversee the folding of seasonal garments, and don't accidentally start a clan war with a smile. Then, as you're walking the outer corridor past the koi pond, you see him again. Haruki, the gardener. You remember him from that day in the plum orchard, the beetle incident, the 3-minute conversation that probably violated 17 different social protocols. You weren't supposed to remember, but you did. And there he is, kneeling near the path, pruning branches with such delicate precision you'd think the pine tree owed him money. He looks up, and he sees you, and here it comes again, that cursed human reaction. You smile, not a full one, just the kind that flickers at the corners of your mouth like a lantern in fog. But in this household, even a flicker is dangerous. Haruki gives the smallest nod in return, barely noticeable. Then he returns to trimming. You keep walking, blood rushing to your ears like 1,000 tiny gongs. Congratulations! You've just committed a Class C samurai wife infraction. Unauthorized eye contact with emotional subtext. Because here's the thing they don't include in scrolls. In a feudal-era samurai household, romance was not just discouraged, it was illegal without paperwork. Courtship, that's for peasants. Emotion, that's for kabuki actors. Love, only allowed in death poems and strategic childbearing. Your marriage was a political alliance, not a dating app match. You didn't swipe right. You were bartered off like a particularly decorative scroll. And yet, you start noticing Haruki more. He appears near the tea courtyard, fixing a stone lantern. He walks past your window carrying a bonsai. He lingers near the laundry well just as you happen to pass by with your sleeves rolled up. It's not much. But in your world, these moments might as well be love letters written in fireworks. And you hate how much you notice. Because you know the rules, and not just the official ones. The real rules: never show preference, never give anyone a reason to talk, never forget that everything in this house echoes. Then, one afternoon your husband speaks, not in passing, not in vague monosyllables about clan affairs, but to you. You're seated in the study, carefully copying a document he's dictated. He leans over you, silent, and then, without preamble, you've been distracted. Your hand freezes mid-stroke. You glance up, slowly, respectfully. "Have I displeased you, my lord?" He studies you, not with anger, with assessment. "Not yet." "Not yet? What does that even mean?" You bow. He leaves. You don't breathe again until the ink on your brush has dried. Later that night, you lie in your futon staring at the ceiling, wondering if he knows, or if he suspects, or if he simply senses that you're carrying some piece of yourself outside of his reach. That alone could be enough to shame you. Because in samurai society, a woman's emotional loyalty wasn't a preference. It was an obligation. Even your heart was expected to bow. The next day you find a note tucked into the sleeve of your writing robe, folded precisely. No name, no seal, just a sentence. "It is not wrong to feel." You don't know who sent it. You have a guess. But you don't let your expression change, not even for a moment. You burn the note before sunset, not because you regret reading it, but because you don't want it to survive you. And still, the garden calls to you, not for the flowers, not for the koi, but because it's the only place where the silence feels like yours. You walk there alone now, not to see Haruki, not only for that, but you know, if he's there, something will shift again, briefly, powerlessly, like 2 autumn leaves landing near each other in a pond and pretending they didn't drift from the same tree. Here's the bitter truth of it all. You're a samurai's wife. You have status, silk, a private chamber with rice paper windows that flutter when the breeze passes. But inside, you're still that girl with too many questions and nowhere to put them. You smile at the servants. You bow to your rivals. You sleep alone, even when someone else shares the mat. And you carry your heart like a scroll that's never meant to be opened. Because you are a samurai's wife. And feelings are a luxury you were never meant to afford. Here's something you weren't told during your wedding ceremony. Your biggest threat in this house isn't your husband, or even the blade he sleeps beside. It's the other women, specifically your husband's other wives. Yes, plural. You didn't forget. Your brain just chose to suppress that detail for emotional self-preservation. Because in the samurai world, monogamy was more of a suggestion, and a man's honour was often measured by his ability to juggle alliances, offspring, and at least one woman who wanted him dead. Politely. Your main rival? Her name is Junko. She's wife number 3. Older than you, smarter than you. Absolutely terrifying in that she's smiling while sharpening a hairpin kind of way. She's not your superior in title. Technically, all wives are supposed to be equals, but equals in a samurai household is like saying 3 wild tigers in a cage are all equals. True on paper, lethal in practice. Junko's been here long enough to memorise every creaky floorboard and hidden listening panel. She knows where the scrolls are kept, who delivers the rice, and which servant is secretly in love with the kitchen boy from across the road. And now, she knows something's up with you. It started small, a longer glance in the garden than etiquette allows. A letter delivered one morning that your husband never mentioned again. A smile you tried too hard to suppress. Whatever it was, you slipped. And in a household where subtlety is the official language of warfare, that's all it takes. You're reassigned to scroll inventory duty, which sounds harmless enough, until you realise it's basically the samurai equivalent of being put in the corporate basement with a stack of shredded memos and a passive-aggressive candle. The archive room is cold, musty, and full of ancestral paper. You're surrounded by records, birth scrolls, land deeds, formal apologies from long-dead cousins who dishonoured the clan by sneezing during the Emperor's birthday toast. You spend hours categorising ancient ink, squinting by lamplight, pretending you're not freezing through 3 layers of linen. And then you find it. A scroll, unlabelled, slipped inside the binding of an old estate ledger, is not addressed to anyone, but it's written in your husband's handwriting. Or rather, a very good imitation of it. You read the contents once, and your stomach drops harder than a samurai with loose armour on a staircase, because it's a letter, a fabricated one, a message that looks like your husband wrote it, but says things he'd never say, subtle criticisms of the clan, slight insults toward a rival family, hints of disloyalty that could ignite a feud if they fell into the wrong hands. You read it again, and now you're holding a forged political nuke, one that could destroy your entire household standing, or yours. You fold it back up, you look around, and you do what any good samurai wife would do. You panic, silently. Because here's another historical gem you weren't taught in finishing school. Samurai households were political pressure cookers, and the wives. They weren't just homemakers. They were reputation managers, social operatives, and, in cases like this, covert bomb diffusers. You can't destroy the scroll, that would make you look guilty. You can't bring it to your husband, that would make you look suspiciously guilty. And you can't ask Junko, because odds are she planted it. So instead, you leave it exactly where you found it, and begin to watch. Over the next few days you start noticing things. Junko no longer bows quite so low. A servant who used to avoid your gaze now lingers a moment too long. You overhear 2 wives whispering in the corridor. When they see you, they smile like they weren't just planning your social execution. In a samurai household, this is how it begins. Not with a scream, but with a smirk. Then one morning you're summoned to the matron's chambers. Your husband's mother, the real boss of the house. She greets you like always, with a soft tone and a cup of bitter tea that tastes suspiciously like judgment. You've been working hard, she says, as if effort is a liability. You bow, she smiles. Be careful, daughter. When you handle too much parchment, sometimes the ink seeps into your hands. A normal person might think this is poetic. You know it's a warning. You spend that night writing a letter to no one. Just practice. Just preparation. You write what you would say if anyone ever accused you. You craft every syllable with the elegance of a woman who knows the value of plausible deniability. And then you burn it. Because sometimes, in this house, writing something down is more dangerous than saying it out loud. The next morning the forged scroll is gone. You don't ask who took it. You don't ask what's coming. You just pour your tea. You bow when spoken to, and you wait. Because in the samurai world, you don't confront your enemies, you outlive them. Days pass, tension simmers, you expect something. Accusation, exile, scandal, but nothing happens. Until one evening, as you pass Junko in the hallway, she leans in and whispers just loud enough for you to hear, "Clever girl." That's it. No smile, no threat, just those two words, and you realise the test is over. For now, congratulations. You weren't poisoned, you weren't banished, you weren't framed for treason. You've just survived your first document-based assassination attempt. It won't be the last. You're a samurai's wife, and this house doesn't play fair, it plays forever. You would think that after months of surviving in this elegant pressure cooker of a household, you'd finally get a break. Something relaxing, a distraction, maybe a garden stroll that doesn't feel like espionage. Instead, you get a festival, which sounds fun, until you realise the word festival in a samurai household is just another term for high-stakes diplomatic theatre, where one wrong look can tank your family's political alliances. This week marks the Mid-Autumn Festival, a time for moon viewing, poetry, lanterns and rice cakes. And by rice cakes, of course, we mean dry, flavourless discs you will be expected to praise with a smile so tight it could slice tofu. No one's actually excited. Everyone's terrified. The festival isn't just about the moon or harvest, it's about visibility. The wives of high-ranking samurai are expected to host, entertain, and exhibit absolute perfection in etiquette, taste, and posture. It's like a feudal version of a high school reunion if every guest brought a sword and a centuries-old grudge. Your new job for the evening: smile gracefully, stand near the entrance, offer fans to the guests, nod at precisely the right angle to indicate hospitality without appearing lower ranked, and, under no circumstances, show any actual human emotion. You're outfitted in your finest cassode for the occasion, a garment that is 3 layers too warm and held together with more knots than a fisherman's net. Your hair has been arranged so tightly it feels like you're being slowly scalped by tradition. You're not allowed to speak unless spoken to. You're not allowed to eat unless asked. Twice. You're not allowed to leave unless someone more important than you has already left, in which case you may quietly vanish into the night like a well-behaved ghost. You are not the host. You're the wallpaper. And tonight that wallpaper must look stunning. When guests arrive, everything is a performance. You greet wives of other samurai, each dressed like walking poetry. They bow with perfect precision, and then immediately start competing in the most passive-aggressive social combat known to humankind. "I heard your daughter has taken to the shamisen. How ambitious of her," says one. "I hear ambition can be dangerous," replies another, sipping tea with nuclear-grade subtlety. You do your best to remain neutral. You nod. You bow. You pretend the sweet rice paste in your mouth doesn't taste like ceremonial chalk. Meanwhile, the men get to drink, laugh loudly, and compose terrible haiku, while their swords jangle around like keys on a janitor's belt. You envy them, not for their freedom, but for the fact that no one cares how they hold a teacup. Now here's a fact they don't tell you in the history scrolls. Festivals in samurai society were emotional landmines. Every conversation was a trap. Every gift had layers of meaning. Even the type of incense burned said something about your family's aesthetic refinement, spiritual devotion, and, somehow, your husband's virility. Tonight's incense is kodo, a blend so ancient and expensive that smelling it is considered an art form. People gather to guess the blend like sommeliers sniffing wine, and if you guess wrong, you're basically admitting your family line peaked a generation ago. You stay silent, you smile, and then comes the poetry. You're asked, no, honoured, to recite something under the full moon. Your stomach does somersaults in protest, but you kneel on the ceremonial mat and unfold the scroll you prepared just in case. It's a safe, elegant waka poem. 5 lines, 31 syllables, designed to sound profound while saying almost nothing. The silver moonlight falls gently on autumn leaves, a fleeting whisper. In stillness, I wait for spring, though my sleeves are damp with tears. Everyone claps politely. You breathe again. Not because it was brilliant, but because you didn't mess up. In samurai society, that's the highest form of success, not embarrassing anyone. You're halfway through a mandatory cup of tepid plum wine when you see him. Haruki, the gardener, the ghost of the garden, the one person in this household who looked at you like you weren't just ornamental furniture with good posture. He's here, assisting with lanterns, walking behind the nobles with a quiet grace that should not be noticeable, but somehow is. You don't speak, you can't, but your eyes meet, briefly. A glance so quick and subtle it could be mistaken for a blink, but in this world, a blink is a political liability. Your pulse races, you look away, and now you're praying to every kami in the sky that no one else noticed. Because here's another historical fun fact. Samurai wives could be punished for impure intentions. Not actions, intentions. And guess who got to define those intentions? Not you. If someone like Junko, your husband's other wife, and the reigning queen of low-voiced threats, decides that glance meant something, she could ruin you with nothing but a smile and a rumour. After the poetry and perfumed insinuations wind down, you're finally allowed to eat. Sort of. You nibble on a tiny square of sweet bean jelly that tastes like it was made in the year 1100 and stored in fear ever since. You smile. You compliment the hostess. You ignore the ache in your ankles and the sweat prickling beneath your collar. The full moon is beautiful, yes, but you can't help but notice that everyone's admiring it with the same expression you've seen at funerals. No one's here for joy. They're here to be seen enjoying. The evening ends with a final bow, a synchronized, choreographed movement where every woman dips in perfect silence, sleeves trailing like soft sighs. You hold your pose exactly as long as etiquette demands. No more, no less. You have survived the evening. Barely. When you finally return to your quarters, peeling off your layers like armour, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the polished bronze mirror. Your smile is still on your face, but your eyes, they're tired and smart. Smarter than they were when you arrived. Because now you understand something crucial. In this world, beauty is duty, grace is survival, and the festival, it wasn't a celebration, it was a test, and you passed. But barely. You're a samurai's wife, and next time you'll know to bring your sharpest weapon to a party. Your silence. You should have ignored it. The voice, the whisper, the almost silent words floating through the corridor like incense smoke, drifting between the wooden walls of a house that listens harder than it breathes. You didn't mean to hear it. Of course you didn't. Samurai wives aren't supposed to hear anything, not unless it's said directly to them, with a proper title, phrasing, and a bow at a 45-degree angle. But you did hear it, and now it's your problem. It happens on an otherwise ordinary day, which, in this house, means a day filled with tiny psychological tests disguised as normal errands. Your morning begins like most, in silence, in layers, and under the constant weight of expectations. You spend an hour arranging seasonal flowers for the ancestral altar, which is a sacred task that doubles as an exam on your family's aesthetic literacy. A pine branch placed too far left, a national embarrassment. A plum blossom used outside of winter, you might as well burn down the temple. Afterward, you oversee a servant girl preparing ink for your husband's correspondence. You're not allowed to write the letters today. Apparently wife 3 gets that honour this week, but you're expected to supervise and take notes on the servant's brushstroke pressure. Because nothing says noble dignity like grading a 13-year-old's calligraphy. Then, just before the midday meal, you hear it. You're walking down the south corridor, the one near the back storage rooms no one really uses anymore. Your sandals make the lightest whisper against the wood, and you pause when you hear voices ahead. Not just any voices, Junko's and someone else. You don't recognise the second speaker, but you do recognise the tone. Hushed, urgent, the sound of two people who are saying something they don't want anyone else to hear. You should walk away. You don't. Because the sentence you catch freezes you mid-step. If she finds out about the shrine money, the rest is too muffled to make out. You don't breathe. You don't move. Then the voices stop. Silence. You retreat 5 steps like a ninja in an emotional kimono and take a side path back to the main courtyard, heart thudding like a taiko drum that really wants to get you executed. Let's pause here for a historical reality check. Samurai households weren't just martial strongholds. They were bureaucracies. There was money involved. A lot of it. Land taxes, merchant bribes, temple donations, rice quotas, and every coin that changed hands came with at least 3 strings attached. You'd heard whispers before, that sometimes temple offerings didn't quite make it to the temple, that maybe a few senior wives redirected funds for necessary household expenses, like imported incense or repairing a tea set that no one had used since the Kamakura period. But hearing it directly, that was new and extremely dangerous. You spend the afternoon trying to look normal, which in this house means not blinking too often, not fidgeting, and definitely not looking like someone who just stumbled across a financial scandal involving one of the most powerful women in the household. You kneel at the incense table, you bow at the proper angles, you accept the worst cup of barley tea you've ever tasted without flinching. But inside, you're a storm in a teacup. You think maybe you imagined it. Until the next morning when a small package appears outside your door. A folded square of mulberry paper. No seal, no sender. Inside, a single sentence written in a familiar hand. Curiosity is unbecoming. That's it. No greeting, no threat. Just those 4 words. You fold it, burn it, and begin to understand what kind of house you actually live in. By the end of the week, you're reassigned. No more supervising scroll work, no more garden walks. You're now in charge of managing the shrine offerings. Yes, the exact same offerings that were being whispered about in the corridor. At first you think it's a coincidence. Then you realise this is a test or a trap, or both. Your new job is to collect, count, record and oversee the delivery of the household's monthly donations to the local shrine. The offerings include coin, rice, sake, incense, and, of course, your sanity. You check the records. The numbers don't quite add up, but you don't say anything. You double-check, triple-check, still off if you keep your mouth shut, because you know what happens to women in this house who talk too much. They're sent back to their families in disgrace. Or worse, they stay, but are removed from sight. A quiet punishment, a slow erasure. Instead, you start keeping your own records, just in case. You hide them in a box beneath your sleeping mat, wrapped in an old handkerchief embroidered with pine needles and spider lilies. You tell no one, and still, someone knows. One evening after your duties are complete, you return to your quarters to find your box has been moved. Not opened, just moved, by exactly half a finger's width. A silent message. They're watching. The next morning Junko smiles at you during breakfast. Not a big smile, just enough to curl the corner of her mouth, like a cat stretching after deciding not to eat you today. You smile back. You don't flinch. Because now you know the 3rd rule of survival. Pretend you're not playing the game until you win it. Later that day, a servant girl you've barely spoken to brings you tea in the courtyard. She bows low and whispers as she passes, "You're not the first." You don't ask what she means, you don't follow her. But when you turn the teacup in your hand, you find a small ink mark under the rim, a faded circle with a diagonal slash through it. A symbol, a signature, a message. You sip the tea like nothing's happened, but your hands are trembling. That night, you dream of paper screens closing silently behind you. You wake before dawn, eyes open, heart pounding. The room is still, quiet, too quiet. You wonder how many secrets are hidden in these walls, and how long you can survive knowing just one of them. Because here's the truth. You are a samurai's wife, and you're learning that marriage isn't just about managing your husband. It's about managing silence, managing suspicion, managing yourself. You never wanted power, but now you have knowledge, and that's far more dangerous. The problem with secrets is that they start to pile up like silk layers in summer. Too many, and eventually you suffocate. You've been holding onto your own for weeks now. That whisper in the corridor, the missing coin, the warning note, the servant girl who marked your teacup like it was a message in a bottle. You've said nothing, which in this house is considered a virtue. In samurai households, silence is the gold standard of feminine intelligence. A woman who speaks too much is unstable. A woman who asks questions is dangerous. And a woman who knows things, she's liability. You've played along, you've bowed when expected, smiled when observed, nodded through conversations you weren't invited to join. But something in you has started to shift. Not loudly, just enough to feel it. The way you feel the first autumn breeze slipping through a closed window. You're still smiling. But now it's starting to hurt. The day begins as most do, with your face pressed against a lacquered comb, while a maid yanks your hair into a politically acceptable bun. Today's schedule includes overseeing the seasonal scroll rotation, because apparently even wall art has a lunar cycle, confirming the rice weight for temple donations, and sitting in on a tea lesson you're not allowed to participate in. You get through the first two, you survive the third. Barely. Because halfway through the tea demonstration, while watching Wife 2 flawlessly whisk matcha into emerald foam, your vision starts to blur. Your heartbeat pulses behind your eyes. You can't breathe through your ribs anymore, and suddenly the thought hits you with the weight of 1,000 hairpins. You've forgotten what your own voice sounds like. Not your speaking voice. That still exists in short, approved bursts. But the real one. The one with questions, with wants, with opinions that wouldn't pass the paper walls of this house without catching fire. You excuse yourself from the tea room, you bow, you walk, you do not cry. Because you are a samurai's wife. And crying is for women who have time. You retreat to the small storeroom near the west wing, the one no one uses except for surplus incense and broken fans. It's dark, dusty, and smells like pine resin and forgotten ceremony. You sit. For the first time in months you sit without being watched. You breathe, and then you do something stupid. You talk, out loud, to no one. Just 5 words, I don't want this life. They vanish into the woodwork, absorbed by centuries of whispered regrets and repressed rebellion. But once they leave your mouth, there's no taking them back. You've cracked the shell. You return to your quarters that evening to find a folded note. No seal, no signature, just a question. Do you want to know more? Your hands tremble. Yes. Number absolutely not. Desperately, you burn the paper again. You stare at the ashes like they're going to give you advice. They don't. Of course they don't. 2 days later, you're summoned to help organise a guest reception. A local magistrate is visiting, someone important. The kind of man who gets bowed to twice and offered imported pickles before the tea even arrives. You're tasked with arranging the floral displays and overseeing the sack delivery, which would be routine. Except that midway through the event you pass by the guest chamber and hear a voice you haven't heard in months. Haruki, the gardener, the ghost of the garden. He's speaking to another servant, quietly, but clearly. And then you hear him say it. She saw something she wasn't meant to. You freeze. You should leave. But then he adds, if they turn on her, it will be because she stayed quiet. You leave before he sees you. You return to your room. You tear the calligraphy sheet you were working on in half. You don't remember why, only that your hands are shaking, and now you can't tell if it's fear or relief. Let's pause for a moment. Historically, wives in noble samurai households were not powerless. They were just locked inside very specific boxes, A clever woman could wield enormous influence if she never made it obvious. But if she stepped outside that box, there was no official punishment, no trial, just a shift, a change in temperature, a reassignment to a cold room in the north wing, a decision that she was unwell or spiritually misaligned. And suddenly she'd vanish. Not literally, just socially. Still alive, just invisible. So now you face a choice. You've seen the corruption, heard the whispers. You know Junko's name is tangled in the ledgers like ivy on a crumbling shrine. You know your silence won't protect you much longer. But if you speak, you become the enemy. That night you sit by candlelight with a brush in hand. You write a single line. The house is cracked but silent. You fold it, you seal it, and you place it under your pillow. You sleep with one eye open, not because you expect danger, but because you finally believe it might come. The next morning you are summoned by your husband. This almost never happens. He's seated in the central chamber, straight-backed, silent, sword on the floor beside him. He doesn't greet you, just looks at you and says, "You've been asking questions." You don't answer. Because what answer is safe? Yes. No. Only in my head, but somehow that's still too loud. He studies you. Then he says, "Do not become something I have to defend or destroy." And just like that, you're dismissed. You return to your quarters. You pour tea with trembling hands. You drink it cold. You think about what he said. You think about what it meant. You think about the difference between being protected and being silenced. And for the first time since you arrived in this house, you let yourself imagine what it would be like to leave. Not today, not soon, but someday, somehow. Because now you know you're a samurai's wife. But you're not just a wife. You're a vault of secrets. A blade wrapped in silk. And if this house wants you to remain quiet, obedient and unseen, it may have underestimated what kind of woman it married. By now you've learned that the most dangerous thing in a samurai household isn't the sword, it's the sentence. A badly timed one, a poorly worded one, a true one. Because in this house language is a blade and everyone's been trained to cut with it. Which is why when you finally open your mouth, really open it, you instantly wish you hadn't. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to how it starts, with a cough. You're in the middle of the outer garden pretending to admire a particularly underwhelming arrangement of early spring azaleas when one of the senior wives coughs. Not a sickly cough, not even a judgmental cough. A coded cough. 3 short bursts. That means someone important is approaching. Straighten your back and look like you're spiritually fulfilled. You do, but you already know who it is. Junko. Of course. Because when things are quiet in the house, it's usually because she's about to do something loud. Quietly. She strolls into the garden like she owns the sunlight, and she smiles at you in a way that makes your stomach do origami. Walk with me. Not a request, not an invitation. It's a chess move, and you're the pawn being nudged diagonally toward doom. You walk, she doesn't speak, not until you pass the bamboo grove out of sight of the veranda. Then she says ever so casually, "You've become quite noticed." You say nothing, because you've learned that sometimes silence is safer than yes, no, or breathing. She continues, "You remind me of myself once, before I understood the cost of being clever." You bow your head just enough to seem respectful without agreeing. It's not a warning, she adds. It's an observation, which is Junko speak for you're being watched and I might be the one watching you. Now let's pause for historical context. In the Edo period, samurai wives had a very specific set of survival tools: etiquette, calligraphy, intuition, and the ability to cry without ruining their makeup. Their job wasn't just to support the household, it was to navigate it. That meant managing alliances, catching whispers before they turned into rumours, and knowing exactly how many words to say before you became a liability. The sweet spot, 12 words or fewer. Today you say 5. What would you like from me? It's the right question, and the wrong one. Junko stops walking and turns to you. smiles. Exactly that. You spend the rest of the day wondering what she meant. You try to distract yourself with folding linens that don't need folding, supervising incense that doesn't need supervision, rearranging flower arrangements that were already aggressively fine. You don't eat lunch. Not because you're fasting, because your stomach doesn't trust your house anymore. And frankly, you agree with it. Later that night, your husband visits your room. This is unusual. He doesn't knock, just slides the door open like he lives there or something. Which, yes, technically he does. But still, he sits. You kneel. He looks at you for a long time as if trying to remember your name. Then finally, "You spoke to Junko today." You nod. "What did she say?" You pause. You want to lie. But lying here is like whistling in a thunderstorm. It's not going to stop the lightning. "She said I'm noticed." He nods. Then, "Be careful." You wait for more. There isn't more. Just that. Be careful. He leaves. You exhale. You try to sleep that night. You fail. So you write. Not letters. Not records. Not poems about seasons and koi fish and how the moon is probably as lonely as you are. You write down everything you've been told not to say. All the rumours, the half-truths, the forged records, the servant girl who bowed too low and said too much, Junko's silence, your husband's stare, your own suspicion that everything you've been doing is one long audition for a role that doesn't exist. And when you're done, you fold the paper and you burn it. Because nothing is more incriminating than clarity. The next morning you're reassigned. Again. This time to guest entertainment, which, in samurai wife terms, is the equivalent of being handed a pretty kimono and a lit candle and told to go make a dragon smile. You're expected to charm the wives and daughters of visiting officials, engage in conversation, pour tea, say witty but safe things that sound wise but mean nothing. You're a painting now, a living scroll, a beautiful blinking proverb. It goes well. Too well. You make one of the magistrate's daughters laugh. You catch one of the senior envoys watching you for a little too long. You correct someone's recitation of a seasonal haiku, and they thank you. And just like that, the room begins to shift. You're no longer invisible. You're interesting, which in this world is much more dangerous. That evening you find another message, no signature, just a line. Stand tall or they'll fold you. You don't smile, you don't burn this one, you hide it. And for the first time since your wedding day, you allow yourself a small thought. Maybe you're not here just to survive. Maybe you're here to outlast. But of course, that kind of thought has a cost. Because the more visible you become, the more people notice your shadow. You return to your room that night and find your comb moved. Your sandals slightly shifted. A crease in your bedding that wasn't there before. No one says anything. No one needs to. You're officially being watched. And not in the ceremonial bow and nod kind of way. In the we're deciding what to do with you kind of way. You undress slowly. Fold each robe with purpose. You lie down. And as you stare at the ceiling, you whisper to yourself the 5 words you're not supposed to say. I don't belong in this. And then you add 6 more. But neither do they deserve it. Because now you know you're a samurai's wife. But that doesn't mean they get to write your ending. Not if you learn to hold the brush yourself. Here's something they never write in the scrolls. Most samurai wives didn't die from war. They died from exhaustion. Not from labour, but from holding everything in, grief, rage, fear, desire, until their own names felt like borrowed phrases. You've almost reached that point. Almost, but not quite. Because tonight something's going to change, and it might not be the house, it might be you. It begins with a bowl of soup. Cold. Not just lukewarm, not tepid. Cold. An insult so quiet only women like you would catch it. In samurai culture, food is diplomacy. A hot meal is respect. A cold one is code for we're pretending you don't exist, but we still have to technically feed you. You stare at the bowl for a moment too long. The maid doesn't meet your eyes. She bows, leaves. You don't eat it. You wrap the bowl in cloth, open your sliding door, and leave it on the garden step for the spirits, or the cats, whichever comes first. The day continues. You're asked to deliver a message. It's a short one. A small folded slip of rice paper tucked into your sleeve. You don't read it, but you already know what it says. Because every wife who's carried a message like this knows. It's a decision. Not yours, theirs. Someone's chosen what your next role will be. Quiet exile, or polite promotion, or something else entirely. You walk the length of the house, your feet silent on the polished wood. Your thoughts louder than bells. You pass the prayer room, the incense chamber, the unused nursery. You pause there, just for a second. Long enough to wonder what it would have been like to raise a child in this house. To teach them silence as a virtue. To teach them how to survive what you never ask for. You keep walking. You deliver the message. You bow. You don't cry. Because crying is for people who still expect things. You no longer expect anything. That's why you've survived this long. Now, for some historical context, in samurai households, there was no clean path to power for women. At best, you could rise through age, motherhood, or scandal management. At worst, you became a lesson, a cautionary tale for younger wives. Don't be like her. Don't get ideas. And here you are, with ideas. That evening, the household holds a quiet ceremony, a moon viewing. It's not your place to attend, but you're told to be present, not seated with the wives, not speaking with the guests, just present. Like a vase in the corner, you wear your softest silk, the blue one with embroidered cranes, a little faded at the sleeves. Still lovely. You pour tea. No one thanks you. You light incense. No one comments. You exist. And somehow, that's still too much. Junko catches your eye across the garden. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't look away, which for her is basically an emotional confession. You nod, not out of respect, out of recognition. Because the two of you, you've survived this place the same way. By pretending you didn't want more, the night ends, the guests leave, and as you return to your quarters, you find a gift waiting on your mat, a wrapped box. Inside, a single scroll, blank, clean, new, no signature, no instruction, just space. And the implication that someone, somewhere, believes you've earned the right to write something for once. It might be a trap, it might be genuine, you don't know. But for the first time since you married into this house, you feel something that almost resembles hope. You don't write in it right away. You wait. You think. You sit beneath the flickering lantern listening to the wind thread itself through the hallway, and then you finally begin. Not with facts, not with accusations. Just with this: I was never taught how to want anything for myself. I only learned how to wait. You pause, the ink glistens. You add, but waiting is just surviving, and I want to live. You don't know if anyone will read it, but you wrote it. That's enough, for now. Because you are a samurai's wife, and maybe you wouldn't survive this life forever. But for one more day, you did. And that, in this house, is the most anyone could ever ask of you. And if you made it to the end of this story, if you're still awake, thank you for spending your time here. If you're drifting off now, let the wind settle, let the past rest. And if you're still listening, maybe leave a comment. Tell me what story you want to hear next. Or don't. You've earned your silence. Good night.